Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart, and as I often like to do on the channel, I like to bring in videos about things that interest me or games that interest me, whether that be in the past or something I'm looking at new now. And Judge Dredd kind of covers that from one side to the other. Now, I'm sure most people are well aware who Judge Dredd is, so I'm not really going to cover that in this video, but suffice to say, he is a lawman in a futuristic alternative America, and if you haven't seen him on the pages of the 2000 AD comic, you may well have seen him in movies, some not quite so good, and some excellent. But this is a wargaming channel and I'm not here to talk about the films. So in 1985, Games Workshop released the first edition of Judge Dredd, the role-playing game. That came in a nice little cardboard box with a separate Games Master's rules and players' rules and maps and little card counters and things. And I absolutely loved it, and my gaming mate, my best mate at the time, Danny, and we played it quite a lot, had lots of fun making up characters and immersing myself in the world. And if I'm honest, that was probably my real introduction to Judge Dredd. I read the odd bit of 2000 AD, but I am not someone who is an expert in Judge Dredd. I was introduced to the world and the character more through playing this excellent roleplay game. Now, sadly, I don't own my copy anymore, but I did pick up the second edition, which came out in, I believe, 1989, and this is a hardback rulebook. The copy I got from eBay was very cheap, it was around £15–16. The cover's taking a bit of a battering, but the inside is pretty good, and I may well get back to rereading the rules and maybe having a game. Who knows, but there's definitely a lot of nostalgia flicking through this book. But again, that's just context for my like of Judge Dredd. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about the I Am the Law starter set, the Judge Dredd game from Warlord Games, previously from Mongoose Games, as far as I'm aware. It's something I've been looking at for quite a while now and thinking about when I was going to be able to squeeze it in. And then a few months ago, probably 2 months ago, I spotted it online for a pretty decent price. I decided to pick it up. And I also ordered a Judge Dredd figure on top as well, which I think is going to be a future painting tutorial. But today we're going to focus on looking at the starter set. Now, the starter set, I believe, retails, or full retail price of £56, which isn't too bad as starter sets go these days. I got mine significantly cheaper for a third-party retailer, so have a look around. I'm giving you the full Warlord price there, and it's fairly well stocked with things. So you've got nice coloured plastic sprues of counters and things rather than all card counters, which is always a nice touch in games these days. You've got your bases, obviously, for your miniatures. You have a lovely set of decals for graffiti. You've got your miniatures, which we'll have a little closer look at later. Some nice dice, which are fully branded and logoed up with 2000 AD. You have some cards, which we'll have a little closer look at later. And you have a sort of poster material game mat, which you can see me just doing a quick scan over there. I'm not sure I'll use these, they're a little bit bumpy, but it's always nice to have them chucked into the game boxes. It is double-sided. You get a little scenario booklet as well. I think it has 3 scenarios in. I'm pretty sure there's plenty more you can download or find yourself or make up yourself, or I think there's a Facebook group as well. I'm sure things get shared on there. And then there's a full colour softback rulebook, which is really, really high quality. So beautiful colour throughout, lots of artwork that you expect to see in the comics and things. And then loads of nice painted miniatures. A really, really nicely produced, quality looking thing. So the cards that are in the sets themselves are also pretty high quality, nicely printed. It's thick enough cardstock, it's nothing that's too weak and flimsy. So these are stack cards for all of your models, your judges, and then your block gang that's in the pack. And then you have all of these cards, which I believe they're sort of like special events or weapons and things. I haven't read the rules yet. This isn't a review. This is like an overview of the game. The miniatures themselves are Warlord resin, so it's the Scio cast material. I'm not sure whether these are the new formulation or the old. However, They are pretty good in terms of not much flash, or in terms of mold lines and things, which for Cycast is slightly rubbery, so can be a little bit harder to clean up than a harder resin, a plastic or a metal. But when you have a good quality initial sculpt, as these seem to be, you don't have to do too much clearing up, so I'm fairly happy with these. They don't overly concern me. If they had lots of flash and things to clear off, it can be a bit of a pain, but based on overall the quality of what else I've got in the box and the quality of these miniatures, I'm happy with what I paid for the starter, and I'm happy for the miniatures to be in this material for this sort of price. Now, I did receive a double of one of the block gangers. I didn't realise when I was first looking through here. I've contacted Warlord Games. I'm sure they will swap that out for me, no problems at all. So there is one miniature I can't show you off here. A couple of them have guns and weapons you need to stick on separately afterwards. So as I mentioned earlier, the connections with the roleplay game from Games Workshop is really what drove me to picking this up, and that, and really loving the film that came out, I think in 2012. There's lots of rumours about whether there's going to be a second film, or maybe it come out on a streaming platform as a series, which would be brilliant. I think Carl Urban wants to come back and be Dredd, so that would be brilliant. But I've always wanted to pick this game up. It's not something that I'm going to have hundreds of videos on the channel for. It's not something that I see myself getting lost into as a main system. But I'm quite happy to have the box sitting on my shelf with a gang and a few judges. So if I fancy playing a skirmish game, that I've got a nice alternative there. And that's really what I'm looking for with some of these. And you'll notice that with my Blood Red Skies videos, if you've seen those, they are smaller projects where I've bought the box, painted everything that's in the starter and a couple of little additions, and then that's it. They sit in the cabinet now till I fancy playing them. I may go back at it later and add more things as and when, but they're not big all-consuming projects like the Epic Battles, Black Powder projects like Warhammer the Old World and the things like that. So as you can see here, I'm cleaning up the miniatures and getting ready to stick them on the bases. So they have the kind of the solid base at the bottom, which is actually quite thick compared to the dipped area on the base. Maybe could have filed them down thinner, but I have a bit of a plan for that later on. There wasn't much cleaning up to do. Some miniatures had a little bit more flash than the others. Some did take a little bit of extra cleanup, but most of them just needed a very light filing. A couple needed a little bit trimmed with the clippers, and a couple more needed that tiny little bit more time spent with a sharp blade, just removing the odd lump here or there. But overall, like I said earlier, what I originally expected to be pretty good examples of Cycast, they turned out to be, and they weren't too painful to clean up. So that's them all assembled, and then the plan for the video really is not to paint them all. I wanted to get one single miniature painted and report back how I found it, and then I'll get back to you with future videos once it's all done, and there'll definitely be a painting tutorial for Dredd. So they're all Zenithal highlighted, prime black, Zenithal highlighted, and I decided to pick this lovely young lady here to be the subject of the painting today. So this isn't a painting tutorial, so I'm just going to give you a very basic rundown of what I've done and the techniques here. I'm using Express Color Dwarf Skin here, and I'm going to use a little bit of the gloomy purple colour that I've been using for most of my skin recipes at the moment, and with some subtle highlighting later on. The overall goal here over the Zenithal of white over a prime black with a little bit of dry brushing is to pick out all of the highlighted areas, almost slap chop-esque, and then add a layer of highlighting afterwards. Probably just one highlight in most cases. The Zenithal highlight will already provide that natural shadow and highlights anyway on the miniature, while I'm using this kind of glazed base coating with Express Color, Army Painter speed paints and contrast paints. You really have the freedom here to paint the miniatures whatever colour you like, so I decided to go for some sort of denim effect shorts here. I think this is Caribbean turquoise from the Vallejo Express colour range. For a nice mix of leather as well, so for her big leather overcoat, I've gone for some Garakak Sewer from Citadel Contrast. Gives a really nice base over that Zenithal Prime. I will do some highlighting afterwards, but it definitely gives you a nice base for doing most browns and especially leathers. I wanted to make the socks brighter and stand out, so I went for some cyan and yellow contrast from Citadel, and again over that sort of zenithal with the dry brush. It almost looks done just from the one coat. Some Black Legion contrast for the boots and for the gauntlets. I wanted to make that look like it was a different kind of leather, a darker leather, maybe a black leather. That contrast paint does have a brown hue to it rather than the Templar, which is more of a blue. So I thought it provided enough of a contrast to the brown overcoat. And then some bright green hair from with Warp Lightning contrast. Now for the big gun, I've actually used Vallejo Express Colour Black Lotus, so you almost got that non-metallic effect going on there, but I will be using some metallics on it afterwards as well. A bit of a mix of methods here, but there's plenty of detail on that gun, so all the colour goes into the recesses really nicely, giving a really pleasing effect. Now with the base coats done, I'm on to the highlights already, aside from metallics that is, and here I'm using some Noctua Fairy Flesh just to start highlighting the skin. It's very, very similar to basic skin from Vallejo, heavily thinned, trying not to go over the existing pink too much as it is anyway, just really picking out those top areas. Now from the same Noctua range, I'm using White Flesh, again from just those really top highlights to make it pop. Then afterwards just glazing back with some heavily thinned deep purple. To highlight the brown leather overcoat, I've decided to opt for model colour at this stage, and I've gone with flat earth and tan brown. A quick highlight of the green hair using Scale 75 Autumn Green. And then to highlight the denim, I'm using some Fantasy Games from Scale 75, and that's Hyrule Blue. Decided to highlight those socks a little bit after all, and a little bit of Phalanx Yellow from Citadel. And then it's just tidying up and finishing off the metallics. So first of all, using some Scale 75 black metal to pick out the chains on the miniature, and to add a very, very subtle dry brush over the weapon, trying not to cover all of the dark black that's already on there from the Express colour. Then finishing off on both areas with some Game Air Silver just to pick out some little top highlights and details. Then once the eyes are done, it is on to the basing. I'm not going to cover that in great detail here. I'll save that for the proper tutorial I do for Dredd, and if enough people request it, I may well do a full tutorial for one of the gangers as well. But essentially I have some mini plaster of Paris type bricks which I filled in the gaps around the edge of the base with some rubble and dust as well, which kind of built up to the same level as the existing kind of pudding base thing that the miniature was on. Then after that I've covered it with a charcoal brown colour and then a bit of non-oil wash. Then once that was fully dry, I brushed in 3 different colours of pigments and sort of a light dusty whitish green colour to give an overall a dusty effect, and then I brushed in a little bit of green in one place and a little bit of rusty colour in another. There was a little hole in the base and I decided to fill it with a little bit of Green Stuff Wild UV resin. And then after that I've decided to add a few little dirty marks in there using Dirty Down's Rust. Added half a quick tuft to look like it's going through the cracks in the pavement, and then did the obligatory black rim base which I do for all my miniatures. Then what the heck, my favourite thing, Blood for the Blood God, decided to add a small patch on the pavement. After all, it is a pretty violent universe. And there we have it, one finished block ganger. I'm pretty happy with the way it came out. It was a very, very quick paint job. Probably did it in about 90 minutes in total, which I'm pretty happy with. It weren't supposed to be the highest of standards, really making use of my current thing of those zenithal highlights and dry brushes with those glazed layers before I highlight. And I think it leaves a pretty decent effect for getting nice looking miniatures on the tabletop. Now, I'd love to hear what you think of the miniature. Do you like the way it's been painted? But most of all, what do you think of Judge Dredd? Have you played any of the old Games Workshop role-playing games? Have you played the game when it was run by Mongoose Publishing? Or have you played it since now that it's been under the management of Warlord Games? What do you think? Maybe it's something you've been interested, like me, for a long time, but never picked it up. Is that something you think you may do in the future? As I said at the beginning of the video, for me it was so cheap at the end. I think it was under £40. It's a very, very low investment, and I'm happy to have it on my shelf, and it just brings back the nostalgia. I'm going to have so much fun painting the miniatures I've got. I've got 8 block gangers to paint. You get 2 judges in the starter box, and then I have Dredd, and then I have Dredd on his Lawmaster as well. I may pick up Anderson as well, but that's it. That's all I've got planned right now. There's plenty of other cool miniatures in the range. I may well add them later on, but I won't do it until I start sort of playing some games, or I specifically want to paint a particular miniature. But I really like to share these things with you as viewers of the channel, because I want to share with you my interests and miniatures, and they're not all epic, they're not all fantasy or world, etc, etc. So it's nice to have a bit of variety on the channel, and hopefully you viewers enjoy it too. But time to let you go, so thank you very much for watching the video. If you've enjoyed it, please do consider giving it a like. If you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. It really, really helps me out, and it's lovely to see those numbers continue to grow. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.